Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekalona, and this is Nashville. Cryptozoology is the study of mysterious creatures that people claim to have seen, yet their existence remains unproven. Cryptids like Sasquatch and the Jersey Devil capture the imagination and have been sighted across the globe. It's no surprise then that Middle Tennessee has its own cryptid activity. Today, we delve into firsthand accounts of these beasts and chat with local researchers who gather their stories. My guest right now is Dr. Daisy Fiore, who has a master's in biological anthropology with a focus on primate studies and a PhD in anthrozoology, and she's the host of the podcast Cryptozoology with Dr. Daisy. Welcome to This Is Nashville. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Really, I'm really excited for this conversation. So, okay, let's break down some of the brass tacks first. What exactly is cryptozoology? And tell me this, how does it differ from traditional zoology?
Cryptozoology is the study and search for animals that are not recognized by mainstream science. That can mean a couple of different things. That can mean legendary animals like Mothman and the Jersey Devil. That can mean animals whose sightings haven't been substantiated by science, things like the orang pendek or Sasquatch. But it can also mean animals that mainstream science believes to have gone extinct, but there continue to be sightings. That's going to be things like the thylacine or some species of birds that people continue seeing. So this differs from mainstream zoology. Zoology is the study of animals that science accepts as being real, and that can take a lot of different forms. So that can be behavioral studies, population studies, but with cryptozoology, the main focus is usually proving that these animals still exist. So it's a lot of sightings and a lot of secondhand stories. So the main focus with that science is simply trying to prove that these animals either exist or that they are still out there and have not gone extinct.
I'm interested in some of your research practices. I lived in New Mexico before I moved to Nashville, and I was a bartender. And I would have some people, various levels of inebriation and sobriety, would tell me stories about how they ran into the famed chupacabra. Is that something that, have you even looked for a chupacabra? Is that on the list of cryptids?
It absolutely is. And, the chupacabra is a very interesting cryptid because it bridges kind of a cryptid folklore. I have a great blog on the chupacabra if you're interested, because it's a very fluid cryptid. There seems to be two forms of it, one in the Southwest United States and then one in Puerto Rico, and they look very, very different from each other. The one in Puerto Rico is this very alien-like thing, and the one in the desert Southwest is this very biological entity that people see. So they're almost two different cryptids when you really get into it. And the one in Puerto Rico really seems to be something that was invented in the 90s after some hysteria surrounding some livestock deaths and someone conflating it with the movie Species that had just come out.
Yes.
And so that one generally is not seen to be a real biological entity, but then it kind of moved over to the United States where people do seem to be seeing something biological that is responsible for deaths of livestock. And actually to the point where people have actually shot things. And there's a woman who claims to have a taxidermy chupacabra even.
Wow.
So this seems to be, definitely something based in biology.
Okay, but I want to ask you about a little bit of your personal experience with this, but I do have to ask, you mentioned the movie Species being the catalyst for this theory of the chupacabra that happened in Puerto Rico back in the day. How often do movies, television, and media kind of intersect with your study?
Somewhat often, I would say. I think, especially when it comes to sighting something very quickly, especially at night, I think that we are very prone to suggestibility. So if you're in West Virginia and you've heard stories about the Mothman and you've seen the movie and you see something very quickly out of the corner of your eye at night, you might say it was the Mothman because those are the stories that you've heard. So it can be very difficult to parse out sightings versus real creatures. And that's where, to me, the anthropology of it comes in, because we do have these sort of strange cryptids like the chupacabra and Mothman, where we are just kind of getting these quick sightings, and they might be very influenced by folklore, by movies, by TV. And then we have these cryptids that are extremely ingrained in local legend and local belief and culture, that are treated as just another animal out there by local people. And those are the ones that really you have to start thinking about. This could really be based in something. So things like the orang pendek in Indonesia, people don't talk about it as a myth, as a folk tale. It's just another animal out in the forest. Oh yeah, I saw an orang pendek today. It's no big deal. Just another animal. Or things like the Mokele Mamembe in the Congo. Oh, did you see one? Yeah, it's no big deal. I saw Mokele Mamembe. And those are the kind of cryptids that you have to really think, if people who live there, who are very close to nature, have seen it, have talked about it for hundreds of years, they don't talk about it any differently than any other animal, then why shouldn't we trust them and at least go look for it?
Can you give us a description of the two cryptids you just mentioned?
Yeah, so the orang pendek is a small-bodied ape, generally thought to be found on the island of Sumatra. And this is one that often in cryptozoology, we say it's going to be weirder if the orang pendek doesn't exist. There are plenty of small apes in that area. There's siamang and gibbons, and there's quite a few well-known scientists who've studied there who have had sightings of it and said, yep, absolutely, the local people are right. I saw one as well. So that one, I'm a full believer in. The Mokele Mamembe is a river cryptid found in the central part of Africa, mostly in the Congo and the DRC. So very unexplored place, very dense forest. That's some kind of large amphibious river animal. Some people have compared it to like a dinosaur, but it seems to be possibly some kind of crocodilian.
Okay. Now you're a scientist. You're Dr. Daisy. Obviously,
Yes.
You come at this subject from a scientific perspective. But I understand you had a personal experience with a cryptid when you were studying in Vietnam. Tell me what happened.
I did. So I did my master's research in Vietnam, just a population analysis of silvered leaf monkeys. And while I was there, I was in the city of Hanoi, just, touristing. And I came upon a lake. It's called Wan Kiem Lake. It's in the middle of the city. It's pretty small. It's pretty dirty. It's polluted. Not a lot of life in it. Not a lot of vegetation. And I was told the story of Kua Rao, the sacred grandfather turtle of Wan Kiem Lake, said to be the size of a car and hundreds of pounds.
Wow.
And there's a temple to the turtle there in the lake. And I was like, there's no way a turtle the size of a leatherback is in this lake. There's no freshwater turtles that get that big. Cool story, bro. And everyone was like, well, no, it's not a story. It's a real turtle. People see it. And I was like, okay, that's great. I was like, I'm absolutely positive as a scientist that I'm right. And there's no way there's this turtle in this lake. So I, went on with my life. That was in 2014.
Okay.
In 2016, the great-grandfather turtle of Wan Kiem Lake washed up dead on the shores of the lake and was indeed 9 feet long and weighed over 400 pounds and was estimated to be over 100 years old.
Wow.
And probably one of the last members of its species. And that is what really gave me pause. I mean, why did I think I knew better than all these people who live by the lake and saw the turtle? If something like that can be living right in the middle of Hanoi, the most congested city I have ever been in my life, what else could be out there that's amazing, So ever since then, If local people say that there is something undescribed living near them, I have to look. I have to. As a good anthropologist, as a good scientist, it's worth looking into.
It's your duty to explore.
It absolutely is. And it's fun.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekalona. We're talking this hour about cryptids. My guest is Dr. Daisy Fiore. Okay, so Dr. Daisy, besides the Honkeem turtle that you met in Vietnam, tell me what other animals are thought to be cryptids that were thought to be cryptids but are no longer?
There's actually a ton of animals that we've all seen very frequently at our local zoos. Chimpanzees and gorillas were both thought to be cryptids. When Westerners first made it to Africa, they were told stories of the hairy men in the forest who don't like to talk to you. And those were gorillas and chimpanzees. One of the most famous is the okapi. It's related to the giraffe. They're very common at zoos and aquariums, but they were thought to be a legendary animal like a unicorn until 1901. So a pretty late discovery. And then there have been quite a few animals that were thought to be extinct and weren't extinct. Probably the most famous is the coelacanth. It's a fish. It's a good sized fish, though. We're not talking something too small. And it was thought to have gone extinct with the dinosaurs 65 million years ago.
Wow.
Until the early 1900s when, oh, look, I pulled one up in my net. And those have been around the whole time, and we were just missing them because the ocean is a big place.
And much of it is unexplored.
Most of it is unexplored.
And so, I'm curious about this. Like, what, as a scientist, you approach this with a scientific mind, but I can tell now that you also approach this with a great amount of energy and imagination, because I imagine it requires all of that. What evidence is used to really support the claims of cryptid sightings? And really, how do you assess their validity?
Whenever I come at a cryptid, whenever one is, brought to me, I always do a couple of things. The first is I want to assess whether it's possible. Is it possible for this animal to be living in this environment? Is there a food source? Is there somewhere for it to be hiding? So it doesn't make sense in context of the environment. Is it evolutionarily possible? So could this thing have evolved? And when you get things like, the giant birds that are 100 feet wide, it's probably not, because that probably couldn't fly. So you have to think about whether it's physically possible, whether something like that could have evolved in that area. So first you look at the whole context. And if it seems reasonable that this animal could be there, then I'm going to look at the history of the sightings. Is this something that just happened after people saw a movie? Or is this something that people have been talking about for a long, long time? And is it something that's talked about in the context of a biological creature? Or is it something that's talked about more like a folktale or a ghost story? Because when you look at things like the Jersey Devil, the story behind that, that Mother Leeds gave birth to her 13th child and hoped it was the child of the devil and it flew up the chimney at birth. Nothing about that seems like it's probably a real biological entity. That seems more like a scary story someone told. So am I looking for a biological entity? Probably not. Is it a fun story that you should go to New Jersey and go to, all the tourist stuff? Absolutely. Okay. And then there's things that are kind of in the middle, like the Mothman.
Hey, we don't know. We'll have to find one in the wild and have you study it to let us know what's going on. Tell me, how have the advancements in technology affected the research in the study of cryptids?
I mean, on the one hand, it's great because there's more people out there with cameras and trail cameras. But on the other hand, it's terrible because there's Photoshop and there's AI generated stuff. And so you have to be a little bit careful because you never know if, someone just created this for fun and then, it goes viral. So sometimes people invent stories about cryptids because they sound cool. And then it goes viral around the internet and it just becomes an accepted part of the lore. And you have to really walk that back and find out, did someone just make that up on a forum because it sounded interesting, or is there any actual basis in this? So unless you can find a contemporary report, sometimes you have to throw away a lot of evidence. This is especially the case for Mothman.
After the movie, as you said, I'm sure. Now, I'm sure you run into skeptics a lot, particularly when you tell them what you do and your focus of study. What do you have to say to the skeptics who are out there thinking that the idea of cryptids is maybe silly and a waste of time?
Oh, there's many. I was actually laughed at in my graduate thesis defense. And it happens a lot. But my argument is always that we have an obligation as scientists. I think that we have an obligation as conservationists. If something like the orang pendek does exist, 90% of all of our primate species on Earth are endangered or threatened. So if it exists, it's almost certainly endangered or threatened. And if we never find it, we can't protect it. So on the off chance that it is out there, we need to go look for it so that we can do right by it. And science is all about inquiry. If you only stick to the stuff you already know, you're never going to discover anything new. So I think this is an important science because we need to preserve biological diversity. So if there are these undiscovered species out there, we need to go find them. And because sometimes when you're looking, you find a lot of other cool stuff. There's a famous guy who's been looking for the Loch Ness Monster for about 40 years. But because of his investigations into the Loch Ness Monster, we now know more about Loch Ness than we do any other body of water on Earth. So they learned a whole lot of important scientific stuff looking for the Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah, and maybe one day they'll find it. All right, final question for you, Dr. Daisy. Probably the most famous cryptid out there is Bigfoot.
Absolutely.
What can people do to help out Bigfoot? Should they leave food out for them? Or will that domesticate the Bigfoot?
If Bigfoot is a large-bodied ape, you definitely should not feed him. That never leads to anything good. The chimpanzees of Gombe Stream were fed for a while. They can become aggressive, but also if it is a large-bodied ape, we are very able to pass diseases to them. So the chimpanzees at Gombe actually were getting polio and pneumonia from humans feeding them, and it took out a good percentage of their population. I'd say if Bigfoot is out there, the best thing that we can do is protect his habitat. He needs somewhere to live, and this is definitely a creature that, if it exists, lives in forests. And we're getting rid of more and more of those every day. So the best thing we can do is protect our forests, protect our public lands, protect those amazing national parks that we have where people see Bigfoot so often. So the best thing we can do is to make sure that our nature stays intact.
Hear, hear. I think the last thing Bigfoot wants to do is live with us because housing prices are way too high. Dr. Daisy Fiore is the host of the podcast Cryptozoology with Dr. Daisy. She also has a master's in biological anthropology and a focus on primate studies and a PhD in anthrozoology. Dr. Daisy, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate this.
Thank you for having me.
All right, y'all, we're going to take a short break. When we return, we'll hear more about some in-person encounters with cryptids right here in Middle Tennessee. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Lake Alona, and this is Nashville. Have you ever been camping or hiking far out in the woods and felt like something was watching you? Who knows? maybe you weren't alone. Now, today we're talking about cryptids of Middle Tennessee. What is a cryptid? Our previous guest just laid it out for us. A cryptid is an animal that is believed to exist somewhere in the wild. It's just that proof of their existence is hard to prove. Now, when someone claims that they've seen famous cryptids like Bigfoot, that's when cryptozoologists are on the case. Some have claimed to have a first-hand encounter with a cryptid. Others have reported on cryptid sightings. Let's meet a few of those folks. Allow me to welcome Erin McCullough, reporter at WKRN, and Martin Groves, a paranormal field investigator and author of Beasts Between the Rivers, to This Is Nashville. Erin and Martin, thanks for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to be here today. Good to see everyone.
Yes, sir. So, Erin, tell me this. Many cryptids are rumored to be here in Middle Tennessee. Are there specific hotspots or areas that have a reputation?
It looks like it's mostly wooded areas, a lot of forests. So a lot of the natural parks, state natural areas are going to have them. Obviously, creepy shadows in the woods at night are the ripe area to have those kind of legends going on.
Okay, now there have been recent sightings, but others were reported decades or even centuries ago. And they're a part of local legend and folklore. Some have even have evidence to support their existence, like the Beast of Sugar Flats Road. What can you tell us about this particular creature?
Right. So this one actually happened just down the road in Lebanon. In the late 80s, there was a couple, the legend says anyway, that a couple reportedly cheating on both of their spouses.
Wow.
With each other. They were traveling down Sugar Flats Lane in Lebanon, and they reportedly hit someone or something with their car. It was about the height of a man, or perhaps slightly shorter and covered in fur rather than hair, which was concerning to everybody, it seems. And now the legend says that the man, once they hit this creature with their car, opted to bury it on site, just on the side of the road, and either decapitated it from the start or returned later out of some worry that something might happen with it later, and then decided to remove its head from its body. But it was then preserved later by a taxidermist and put on display for decades in a now defunct antique shop in Lebanon.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay, so tell me about other cryptid legends here in the area.
Well, there's also the werewolf of Dixon County. Have you heard of that one?
No.
So the legend in Dixon County says that in the late 1860s, so we're going even further back in time, a passing circus train either stopped unexpectedly or derailed just outside of Burns Station, and many of the circus animals escaped into the surrounding countryside. One of the creatures in the circus was said to have been a pair of men known as the Wolfmen of Borneo. They were reported to be half man, half beast, and they were never captured.
Never captured.
They never got him back.
All right, now tell me about the White Bluff Screamer.
Now, this is also from Dixon County. The legend around this one says it's happening in the woods surrounding Montgomery Bell State Park. So if you like to vacation or visit over there, watch out if you're there after dark. It's said to have been home of a mysterious creature known mostly by its screeching wail since just after World War I. So a little bit more recent than the 1860s, but still way back in time. People in the area reported hearing screaming, and they were warned away from the noise of the White Bluff Screamer.
Wow.
According to actually a friend of mine, Lyle Russell, who's a historian who actually has a podcast on hauntings and cryptids and legends of this nature, he was telling me that the first encounters with the White Bluff Screamer involved a new settler in the area just southwest of what is now White Bluff, Tennessee. The man, his wife, and their 7 children reportedly heard the screaming begin not long after they built their home. And then after they kept hearing the screaming, they were trying to ignore it for a while. And then after a minute, that grates on your nerves for a little bit. And then the screaming turned into a terrible hollering. And eventually the settler's wife was losing sleep to it. So naturally, the man, wanting to protect his wife and his family, he went out to try to find this thing and was walking into the woods and grew deeper and deeper into the forest. And one night, with his rifle in his hand, he told all his children and his wife to lock all of their doors and windows because that was the night he was going to go find them. Mm-hmm. And even though he was an expert woodsman, he eventually got lost in the forest because he's in a new land, he's got a new home that he's built, and you're still figuring things out, in a new place. But he got lost in the forest when he was trying to track down the creature. Even though he kept hearing it scream. Like he would hear it every so often and try to follow the noise, as you do if you're trying to figure out where something is coming from. But as soon as he thought he was getting closer to the sound, it would move. And then eventually he was getting so deep in the forest that he realized the sound was coming from back by his home, where his wife and his children were. And so he ran back home. And then when he got there, unfortunately, he came back to the gruesome scene of his now dead family.
Wow.
All of his family was slaughtered, so they say. The man fell to his knees in grief and horror, and only to be taunted once again by the mysterious screaming after he found his family.
White Bluff Screamer. Wow.
Now, some legends say that the man actually turned into the White Bluff Screamer after the fact because he was so horror-stricken by the loss of his family that he was the one wailing in grief. But that's just the story.
Man, all right. That's one story. That's a hell of a story right there. Now, Martin, you've done a lot of investigation and field work. You're a former law enforcement officer over 25 years, right?
Yes, sir, I am.
What evidence do you collect to support the existence of cryptids? Is it photos, footprints, eyewitness accounts?
Yes, I'm a little bit different of an investigator. I do deal with the types of evidence that you might locate in the woods, whether if it be hair samples or foot tracks of these creatures. But for evidence, we have so much evidence, and I've just got to tell you something that she just said. We have a very good witness that came forward in February of 2024 of this year that I went to the area she spoke of in Montgomery Bell Park, and we have tracks of dogman, or what we believe, werewolf, that were 9-inch. Now, keep an idea that the largest wolf track that has ever been recorded in America was 5.9 inches.
Okay.
We have wolf tracks between 8 and 9 inches, and at the same time we found Bigfoot tracks within the park of where she's speaking of. So we have modern-day sightings as well as all the older stories that have come out of Montgomery Bell Park.
Now, you wrote the book, The Beast of the Land Between the Lakes. Wrote a book about it.
Yes.
Tell me about that story, that legend, briefly, if you can.
The legend came out from a long time ago. To discover the legend, you have to go back to many, many, many years ago. We have to go back to the oral history and then the written history of the Cherokee and the Shawnee, and even back to the Adena mound builders that have built all their tombs all over. The land between the lakes is virtually a marrow of souls and just a history of sightings of the shadow people, werewolves, the sloping giants the Cherokee spoke of. And so basically what happened to me was in 1993 I had a sighting, which was a very terrifying sighting, and there's no way to tell the entire story in the time that we have. But I had a sighting of Bigfoot and what we call werewolves or dogmen. And that set me on a adventure for the last 3 decades where I investigate and speak with witnesses, and then I go to the locations where these sightings have occurred. And so for 3 decades plus, I have contacted these witnesses. I relived their contact with these beasts all over land between the lakes. Mm-hmm. And now I might say that these witnesses are extremely well competent. Their mental status is great. These are good, competent witnesses, doctors, lawyers, police officers, farmers, clergymen. I'm working a case right now where a pastor has been investigating Sasquatch harassing people in graveyards.
Wow. Wow. Okay, if you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekalona. We're talking this hour about cryptids of Middle Tennessee. My guests are reporter Erin McCullough and paranormal investigator Martin Groves. I'm interested, like your former colleagues, when they hear about your research in the course of study and investigations, are they skeptical about it?
Some are, but here's the deal with this. I was well known to be a extremely respectful and highly respected pillar in the law enforcement community. I was president of the Fraternal Order of Police. I spoke at many types of functions that in the police world. So the majority of people that knew me, they respect what I have to say, and they respect the eyewitness accounts, and they know that my investigations, even in law enforcement, were what we call in the field top notch.
All right. Now, we're going to listen to a clip about a sighting that was here. The Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization has over 100 documented encounters in Tennessee, the most recent being, quote, a close-range multi-witness sighting 3 miles west of Lawrenceburg, end quote, in June of 2021. But sightings go back generations in the region, according to Darrell Denton, who encountered what his grandfather told him was a woodbogger in Cannon County in 1992. Denton told his story to our producer this summer at the Tennessee Wildman and Cryptid Conference in McMinnville. Let's listen.
The first encounter I had was in Cannon County, Tennessee, November the 6th of 1992 on my grandfather's farm. That was my first encounter, and that was a Bigfoot-type creature, which I found out later on was called a wood booger. That's what they called it in the South. I'd never heard of it, and I never even believed. I didn't know if I believed in the creatures or not at that time. But after you see one, then you definitely believe, and it was definitely a life-changing moment. That's for sure. It was the week of right before black powder or muzzleloader season that Tennessee has every year, where you can use a black powder rifle to kill either sex deer. And I was up there with 3 of my friends on my grandfather's place, where we've been the last 5 or 6 years. This creature, I was in my tree stand, and this creature came out, and these deer seen the creature and took off running, and I didn't know what they were looking at. And this thing walked out of this large cane thicket on the river or creek bank, and it was a large monster-looking thing. I'd never seen anything like that. I was up in my tree stand 25, 28 feet up, and scared me to death. I've never been scared like that. I don't scare easy anyway. But I didn't know what it was, and it came out and jumped across the creek, and then it growled at me, showed me its teeth, and then it screamed at me, and looking right at me, pretty much. I thought for sure it was going to come across the creek and just pull me out of the tree and do whatever it wanted to do with me. I had no idea, really, but it changed my life, like I said, completely. I never thought about anything like that being in the woods. I've hunted up there all my life, but not that far in. I was deeper in than normal. When I say deeper in, I mean further in the woods, but a place I'd never been before. I told my grandfather, he was 92 years old at that time, and he said, well, you seen a wood booger. I described it to him, and I said, what is a wood booger? I never heard of a wood booger. He never told me anything about it, and he explained it to me. He said, they live in the woods around here. My parents knew about them. My grandparents knew about them. They've been around here for a long time. They're very territorial. They don't want you in their area. But it wasn't like they were going to attack me. He made me feel comfortable around them. As long as you stay away from them and don't invade on their area, they're not going to bother you. So he was comfortable with them. He'd seen 4, and he'd heard a lot more. He said they would scream or holler, and he could hear them arguing or fighting or, I don't know, with different things he mentioned. I don't recall everything he said, but I said, why didn't you have told me? And he said, what if I'd have told you? You wouldn't have hunted in the woods and played in the, just played in the woods and spent the night, with your family and your friends, camping out or in the barn or hayloft like we camped out when we were kids. But so I didn't want to change your life. I wanted you to enjoy it and not worry about something like that, because they're not going to hurt you as long as you don't invade their territory. So I was kind of shocked. I never heard of anything like that. So. But it was life-changing. It took me about 7 years I didn't go in the woods for 7 years.
And then go into the woods for 7 years. Wow. Martin, briefly, you have a comment about that?
The gentleman you just heard is my brother. He is, we have been very close for 43 years. He is a very competent man, and we have dubbed him the Tennessee Bigfoot Man. And he was a mayor for over 20 years for the city of Ridgetop. He's a very competent individual. You've heard one of the best witnesses out of the state of Tennessee.
Okay. Now, Erin, I know you don't cover these stories a lot. So let me ask you this very, very important question. Mm-hmm. Given everything you've just heard, You going camping anytime soon?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I am not an outdoorsy individual. I'm more outsidey than outdoorsy.
All right. Wonderful. Wonderful. I want to thank you so much for being with us. Erin McCullough is a reporter for WKRN. Again, Erin, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Martin Groves is going to stick with us through the break. When we come back, we'll hear more about cryptids and the stories and learn about the legends of Dogman and the beast of the land between the lakes and the giant bird also known as Mothman. You can join the conversation by tweeting us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back. I'm Khalil Ekolona, and this is Nashville. We've been discussing the cryptids of Middle Tennessee. Cryptids are among us. They're just hard to see and pin down. Some folks are pretty skeptical, but our guests are investigators and researchers who have experience with the unknown. I'd like to introduce my next guest. Donna Hartley Lucas is the owner of Sumner County History and Haunts, where they host the Gallatin Ghost Walk. She's been writing about Sumner County history and ghosts since 2005, and she's the author of the book, Historic Haunts of Sumner County. Donna, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Really great to have you. I have to know this. Please tell me, did you ever have an encounter with a ghost or a cryptid that sparked your curiosity in the field? Tell me, what got you writing and investigating this type of phenomena?
My focus has been mostly ghosts and the paranormal as they are connected to history, particularly in Sumner County. When I moved here in 1999, I realized that this was a hotbed of paranormal activity, and you didn't just ask somebody, have you ever seen a ghost? You ask, what kind of ghost do you have at your house?
Wow.
Because it's just about that prevalent. Plus, we have probably one of the most haunted, if not the most haunted structure in the nation, which is Cragfont.
Tell me about that.
A historic home.
Tell me about that.
Well, they have everything from demonic activity to sweet spirits to poltergeist activity. They are not far from Skull of the Caves, where Native American interwarring tribes buried some of their conquered dead. They are not far from archaeological mounds tied to Native American presence here. And they just have more paranormal activity in one centralized location than most people will see studying it at 10 or 20 structures. It's a fascinating story.
That is pretty wild. Okay, now you have the book called Historic Haunts of Sumner County, Tennessee. And
Yes.
I understand that while you were interviewing two women for the book, they said, quote, "Let me tell you about the night the giant bird swooped down on our car." What did they tell you?
Well, I had initially wanted to interview them. They live in the Mount Olivet community, which is a very, very long-standing African-American community of farmers, and it's being encroached on by development. They had their own school, their own church, their own cemetery, a very tight-knit African-American community that's been there since the mid-1800s. And I wanted to talk to some women about growing up in a house where they saw full-bodied apparitions of Native American people, most dressed in full warrior feathers and what you would see when we think of Cherokee warrior chiefs. These entities, full-bodied apparitions, walked around their farm all while they were growing up. And that's what we started talking about. And we would talk about not cold spots, but hot spots that they would encounter walking along the road. Back until about 1940, the people did not all own cars and trucks out there. They had to share and they had to walk everywhere. So the advent of the car for these people, took them a little bit out of Mount Olivet community and onto Long Hollow Pike, which now, of course, is a major thoroughfare between here and Goodlettsville, but then was a country road with trees growing so tall and profuse that they would grow from either side of the road and meet in the middle over the roadway. And so we're talking about the Indian apparitions, the Native American apparitions. And she goes, well, wait, don't you want to hear about the giant flying white thing that would get on top of our cars and pace our cars as we drove on Long Hollow Pike? And I said, yeah, let me hear about that.
Yeah.
And I said, when was this? And she goes, oh, for years, ever since we started driving cars very much on Long Hollow Pike. You might be in your car and suddenly something with a wingspan that went further than the width of your car would get on your car or pace your car or fly above your car. She said it happened to my uncle. He didn't know whether to speed up or slow down, try to outrun it, but you couldn't outrun it. It would pace your car.
Wow.
And they couldn't really see anything but the wings. But at one point in time, someone saw something that looked like a man's torso and head in addition to the wings, which sounds very much like Mothman, of course.
The famed Tennessee Mothman. Now, paranormal investigator and author Martin Groves is still with us. Martin, we've been hearing about encounters with creatures who are mostly benign or elusive, but I understand. On a hunting and camping trip, I think you started telling us about this a little bit earlier. You were in a heavily wooded land between the lakes area on the border of Tennessee and Kentucky. You and another law enforcement officer had an encounter with something you say was more supernatural and evil in nature. I don't have much time left, but can you describe the moment you first saw it?
The very moment that we had the encounter, I had never run across anything that would make you have the fear level and the feeling of sheer dread as if you knew you were going to die. And I had been well trained as a police officer to deal with any type of life and death situation. And so for me to have the fear as if you were a child, afraid to get out of your bed, and that you were seeing something that you knew that by all rights is not supposed to exist. I'm not the type of person, especially in 1993, to believe in monsters. What we saw in those woods would give the average layman the feeling of sheer dread and sheer evil. And it was the first time I was contacted telepathically by one of these beasts, and it gave me the feeling and to know that I was going to die.
Now, you describe it as hairy and terrifying creature between 6 and 7 feet tall, was standing on two human-like legs. Were there any other distinguishing features of the creature?
The eyes were as black, and just what it projected to both of us, the other witness and myself, was just sheer evil. And the eyes stood out, and they were just sheer black, dark as the pits of Hades. And the teeth, the pronounced snout and the teeth, the canine, and they were dripping. And when you get into the encounter, and I realize it's time factor here for us, it was holding a hunk of meat in its left hand. Mm-hmm. And it was dripping with blood and all these things that you see that took place to us. Anyway, it was sheer evil.
Now,
evil.
You said something about it reached into you telepathically, and it created this sense of fear. Were you able to think clearly while you were in this moment?
In that moment, in many movies and documentaries, I speak of this, but I did not have full faculties at given time. The only thing that brought me out of this was my religious convictions, and I began to pray, and I prayed to God to see me through this, and I had said a prayer. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing that got me through the situation, and we were able to escape the grasp of this thing.
Now, you and your partner, traveling partner, another law enforcement officer, were you armed?
We were both armed, and in fact, at some point in time, I was able to gain my composure, and I fired my handgun twice at this creature or beast that was attempting to come in and kill us and eat us. And I fired 2 rounds, and it seemed to have zero effect, and it disappeared and went up the wall, a granite wall that was behind us. The individual that was with me, he fired a 10-gauge double-barreled shotgun into the creatures that were behind him, and we did hear where we believed that he struck one of these beasts, but it did not affect it. It only seemed to have made it mad, and it began to tear up the trees behind us and to really cause a ruckus in the woods.
I imagine that is quite a ruckus. Now, Donna, getting back to your story, I understand that you've researched accounts that are told by Native Americans in the area, and some people would talk about these stories that are being shared as lore, and they would dismiss it. Do you feel that way?
Well, I don't think it is very well known in this area, not like you hear about the Thunderbird or the Phoenix or even Mothman, a giant flying bird-like creatures, sometimes with shape-shifting abilities, are part of Native American legend and lore across North America. What is unusual here is not many people, I found out, know about the Cherokee legend of the Tlanawa, and it fits right in with what these women saw, because we had a high Cherokee presence here, and we have the habitat where the Tlanawa likes to live, cliffs and caves. Tennessee has 20% of the nation's caves, despite being number 36 in landmass. So we have a lot of caves, many unexplored. And the Tlanawa, the giant mythical flying beast that the Cherokee talked about, fits the description of what these women saw, and we have the habitat for it. So I'm wondering if, unlike your first guess, that yes, something this large probably couldn't really fly if you think about the physics of it. But if it's supernatural, well, then there you go.
What do you have to say? I'm sure there's some people that may be listening to this episode who are skeptical, who are like, I can't believe This Is Nashville is taking time talking about this. What do you have to say to skeptics about, when it comes to this topic?
My husband's more skeptical than I am, but I am a skeptic about Sasquatch, Mothman, and these types of things. I've had enough paranormal experiences myself where there's that I'm not so skeptical about. I'm a little bit skeptical about cryptozoology, but becoming less so every day because there's just so much we don't know.
Martin, I do want to express the same question to you. You were talking about folks, about people that you know who are witnesses earlier in the show about they're well-respected members of society who are putting their reputation on the line to talk about this type of stuff. What do you say to the people who don't believe them?
That is one large question, and I would love to sit and speak with this lady that's on with us now. She is great. She's phenomenal. I go back to the Cherokee and the Shawnee legends that gives a better explanation of all of this. We can go back to the Sloping Giants, to the Hairy Man. What I say to skeptics is be respectful. There's always a witness that is out there listening to us. We have a basis of over 200 years of criminal courts where eyewitnesses can come forward and tell what they have seen. And they are an eyewitness to a crime. Their testimony alone will put someone in prison. My testimony alone will put somebody in prison as criminal investigation or as an eyewitness. So we need to give more credence to eyewitnesses, to people who see these things. I was a non-believer. I was a skeptic. I'll be honest with you. I had no idea. But until, just like what she just said, I began to explore, and I will say very quickly, Fred Roll, a curing tribal council member says it best out of Alaska. Our Native American oral history is not lore. It is not lore. It is their history of what they have seen. So there is a lot of difference when I hear folks talk about the lore of our American Indians. That is their oral history, and it is true history. It is not lore. They saw these things. They saw these creatures. And, you and I were speaking earlier today, the witness where they write on the caves and they write down their history on rocks.
Mm-hmm. I want to thank you both for being here today. Martin Groves is a paranormal investigator and author of Beast Between the Rivers. Donna Hartley Lucas is the author of Sumner County History and Haunts. She runs the Gallatin Ghost Walk. Thank you both for being with us here today and expanding our understandings. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Mary Mancini, directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our technical director and board operators, Liv Lombardi, the masterminds behind our theme music, Arlo Range and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation does not end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram. Tell us what you want from the show by filling out our quick survey online. You can also call us to leave us a message at 615-751-2500. Note, we may use that message on air. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Lake Alona. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. And be good to each other and the cryptids.